Hi, and welcome to the UK Gravel Collective Cycling Podcast. I think this is episode 3 or 4. And on the UK Gravel Collective website, ukgravelco.com, I did do a series of sort of meet the maker interviews with people in the bike industry. And on this podcast, we're going to do a live interview with one of those people. I interviewed them for the website, but this guy is a bike designer, designer in general, and heavily invested in designing gravel bikes. So let's start the episode and make the introductions. Okay, so I've done a brief introduction for the UK Gravel Cycling Podcast. So on today's show, we've got Alistair Beckett, who I describe as a designer, bike brand owner. So before we start, I've got a curveball question, which is nothing to do with cycling at all. It's just to get you into the feel of it. So if you could only go on holiday one place, one last time ever, you weren't allowed to go on holiday after this, where would you go?
Where would I go? Oh, what a curveball. That's a good question. If I could go at one, I'm only allowed to go. This is my last holiday ever.
Yeah, you'll never go on holiday again.
Where would I go?
Not for any bad reasons, just
where would I go? Jeez, I'd go somewhere I hadn't been before. I think I've always wanted to go to Japan. I've never been to Japan. I think I would go there if I'm I've been to lots of different places, and they've all been brilliant, and I'm sure I'd love to go back to loads of them. But I think if it was, you've got one more shot, I'd rather do a place I'd never been to.
Just for the totally different culture.
I think so. Yeah. Like I've been to Asia, obviously, but I've never been to Japan. And for some reason, I think Japan would be different to China and Taiwan. I don't know why. I've not really as much interest in Scandinavia, or I've been to loads of places in Europe and the States, and I've never been to Australia or New Zealand. And I guess the mountain biker in me would say, "Oh, I want to go to New Zealand and ride my bike there. That would be the trip." But for some reason, I think Japan would be where I would choose. Can't expand on it why, but
yeah. Well, I definitely like to go to Japan.
yeah.
So yeah, great answer. Better than sort of Bognor Regis or if anyone's listening in Bognor Regis, no offense, but I think you know what I mean. Okay, so I described you as a bike designer and a bike brand owner. Is that how you'd describe it? Is that what you've always done?
No, no, definitely not. The bike owner thing's quite new. A bike company owner's new. I guess I would describe myself as an engineer, probably more than anything. That's kind of what I'd studied and what I'd done, and then I suppose I've deviated away from that a few times throughout the last 10 or 20 years. But I guess that's what interests me most is the bike design side of things and the manufacture of it. So that's probably where my interest lies, and I'll always migrate back to that. The other stuff, I suppose, the business owner and the mechanical side is all, I guess that's a necessary evil to let me want to design bikes a bit more. But you're probably not too far away, I guess.
Okay, and have you always done that from when you left uni or school?
When I left, I've always been into bikes. I think from pretty much age 12, that's when I started to take it more seriously. As a kid, I cycled, or I didn't take it that seriously back then, but kind of when I started my secondary school, my grammar school, I got more into it, and I had buddies that were into racing. So that's when I started to get into bikes. And then I think I've always had I wouldn't have been the most academic person, so I kind of got more into the physical hands-on, technology courses and all that kind of stuff in school. And I think that planted a seed that turned into an interest in engineering.
More technical design. Drawing than adding up and maths and
exactly. Yeah. Like maths and physics, I could see some logic to them. I think I'm quite a logical person. So those versus English language and religious education, all those other things I was less drawn to because they weren't as tangible. So maths and numbers and drawing stuff and creating things out of nothing, they were I guess, a bit more in my bag. So
Yeah.
that kind of steered me towards industrial design or engineering. Yeah.
So although
Whether I liked it or not.
you've always been into bikes, obviously
Mm.
you can't walk straight into a job designing bikes, surely. So what was your first
Mm.
job in design or engineering?
I did a little bit of like summer placement work in a factory that was kind of not too far from where our kind of workshop is at the minute, and that gave me a little, like, I started just sweeping the floors there, and
Yeah,
they were producing like extruded tubing, things like that. But I just kept doing that every summer, and then I got a little glimpse of them designing machinery and designing bits and pieces, and I was kind of, oh, I'm interested, and that kind of all happened at the same time as I was starting to study engineering. So I guess that gave me a little insight into it. But as soon as I finished college, I was like, I want to work in the bike trade. I want to, what job can I get? And
yeah,
because we're based in Northern Ireland, there wasn't the same level of bike industry over here. The mainland where you guys are, it's a bit, there's a lot more bike shops. There are distributors, there are brands.
yeah,
That didn't really
yeah,
exist here. So I suppose my only option was to really go to the likes of Chain Reaction, which was a small company at the time. And
yeah,
so I got a sales job there, just answering phones and talking to customers, because it was small enough at that point that you could actually speak to someone on the phone.
yeah, yeah.
So
I remember
it was
those
a
days. Yeah,
yeah. So it was more of a technical sales type thing. And then I moved into warranty, and if there was an opportunity or somebody left, I'm like, oh, I could do that. I was like a sponge. I just wanted to kind of take it all in. So I did a year or two of that. And then a buddy of mine was a World Cup racer in downhill at the time. And then so a year or two after, he said, do you want to come and kind of work with me and help me as a mechanic stroke manager stroke driver, cook, chef, all these things.
yeah.
So I thought I was still pretty young at that point, so that gave
Well, I
me
think
that opportunity.
you've got to be to do that sort of thing, haven't you? Sort of
Yeah,
drop
yeah,
everything and
exactly. Yeah. Well, you think at the time you're dropping everything, but you realize, looking back now, I'm like, I didn't really have what was I? I
yeah,
wasn't giving up very much to go and do that
yeah.
versus now. So yeah, that kind of set me on a path, I guess. But I suppose my first real engineering job was after I'd done like 5 years of that, and then I ended up coming full circle and coming back to Chain Reaction as a design engineer. They had, or I suppose, created a position for someone to come in and do that, who had 3D CAD knowledge and that
Yeah.
kind of side of it, because they didn't have that at that time. So that was kind of that was the tip of the iceberg that really hooked me into engineering and design. Then at
So
that point,
you were right in the growth of chain reaction. I'll have to mention, because some people may have no idea what chain reaction is. It started off just as a bike shop in Northern Ireland,
yeah, it was a
and it
small
was
mom and pop
it
shop.
was right there on the start of sort of mail order parts
Mm,
and access. So I remember going to one of the bike shows in Birmingham at the NEC. And
yeah.
one year, Chain Reaction had a stand there. They were selling bits off it. The next year, there was no stands. There were just computer modules, and you could
Yeah.
order stuff off a touchscreen. It's like overnight, it completely changed.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah. It grew quite quickly, I think.
they've gone from strength to strength, haven't they?
Yeah.
But so you were working for those as a designer. Are you
Mm.
allowed to say what sort of stuff you designed?
Yeah, well, at the start, I worked on a lot of their own. So they have their own in-house brands, as most distributors and larger companies do have.
Yeah,
So they had brands like Ragley that maybe a lot of the UK gravel guys would be familiar with. They had a brand called Nukeproof, and then they just acquired the trademark for Vetus at the time, as well as they had loads of random kind of, I'm not really sure how to describe them, brand names that they bought tools from and sold under, all that kind of stuff. So
yeah,
when I started, I was working on kind of Ragley, Vetus, and Nukeproof. Any of those brands that we were designing, and it could be designing a chain device or a frame or any kind of widget that they wanted to bring out under those brands at the time. And then a kind of a year or two in, I ended up focusing my efforts more on just Nukeproof, and that became like my major project for the next 7 years while I worked there.
So I had I can't remember what model it was, a Ragley. It was a steel Ragley, blue,
Yeah, Blue
blue
Pig.
with
Mm.
yeah, I think it was a blue pig. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
were you involved in the design of that?
At some point, well, those bikes had already been designed by there was another engineer who worked there, and then there was Brant Richards,
Yeah.
and he was involved,
Okay. Yeah.
and he kind of as I came into the business, he kind of moved on, so I wasn't that familiar in how his relationship worked with that.
Yeah.
But I think he was a big part of it. But Brant was a very good marketeer, and he was kind of designing
I
stuff
still is.
on the yeah, exactly, yeah. No matter
Yeah.
what he turns his hand to, he seems very good.
Trousers at
Uh,
the moment.
yeah, exactly. But I think he would come in and he would kind of he would sketch out an idea for a bike on a piece of paper or a napkin or whatever, and then work with one of the other engineers to try and pull that all together. So they cobbled that all together, and then I
Yeah.
think at that point I came in and started to help maybe refine it more. So they moved from one factory into another, and I added a little bit more of the 3D engineering and a bit more refinement to the whole thing, I suppose.
Okay. Well, that's interesting because obviously I ride one of your bikes now,
Yeah.
and I could have ridden a bike that you'd done the
Mm,
refine and the design on before, and
maybe.
yeah,
Yeah, maybe.
that was a cracking bike for going downhill.
They
Yeah,
were good
definitely.
they were good hardtails, and they were, I suppose, quite forward thinking. A lot of the geometry that people think of now with hardtails, I
Yeah.
think Ragley were pretty pioneering in it. Whenever they were, I don't know, that must have been 10 years ago, maybe more. I
Yeah, I think
guess
it
all those
was.
time.
Yeah, that's the most
Yeah,
shattered I've ever been at riding, just downhill at Bike Park
really.
Wales.
Yeah, yeah. Just
But
getting
doing it on a
hammered a bit.
hardtail probably wasn't the best idea.
Yeah, yeah,
So I think I need to say that how we met.
yeah,
'Cause I started the UK Gravel Collective in 2019, and I
yeah.
think it was in 2020 that I noticed that your brand, Fustle Bikes,
Mm,
um, on Instagram, and I remember
yeah.
messaging you just on the off chance, really, because I was looking for things to review and to see if I could review one of your bikes.
Mm,
And I remember coming out of work and speaking to you. It was about 6 o'clock, I think,
that's
one
right.
dreary February or January. I know it was literally probably a month before the first COVID pandemic
Yeah, yeah.
lockdown.
Yeah. Yeah, it
Um,
would have been January, February time,
and I
wouldn't
think we chatted for probably about 40 minutes in my car. You weren't in my car, obviously.
it? No, I'm not
And
sure
you
where I was.
agreed that when a test bike became available, that
Yeah.
you'd let me do it. And I think that first review snowballed most of the other reviews
Mm,
because it was really well
yeah.
received.
Yeah.
Um, and unfortunately, because I really liked the bike, I ended up buying one, which has become a bit of a habit. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. An expensive habit, I'm sure.
yeah, yeah. So I need to say thanks to you for that, for having the faith that I wouldn't just disappear with your bike.
We kind of assumed. I think whenever that conversation was interesting from my side, and I think we touched on it just a little bit earlier at the start of our chat. We're big fans of kind of the underdogs because the industry is constantly changing, and everybody starts as an underdog. Everybody starts small, and I think when we were launching Fustle, we were such a small team, and it was a non-entity brand, and I think at the same time, your story ran in parallel where you're giving UK Gravel Co. You're going to give it a go and see what comes of it. So,
Yeah,
it kind of felt to me like a good fit where I'm like, well, like Gary's trying to do something from nothing with, probably it's quite a challenging time to do that, to get started. So I felt like, what, he's a really good fit for what we're trying to do as well. So it made
yeah.
sense to send a bike across. And I kind of figured, yeah, if you disappeared off of the bike, at least that was one more bike on the mainland. Someone would have seen it.
Well, I
But
remember because it was a blue version, and
yeah,
I remember because I didn't actually get the bike until I think it was like springtime, so we were proper in lockdown then.
yeah. Well, I
Um,
think it got redirected, didn't it? We'd sent a bike to another magazine and they had it, and then or we'd agreed to send it to them, and then you and I had the chat. So we were trying to get it redirected to you
yeah,
before it came back, rather than I didn't want to ship bikes back and forward across the Irish Sea all the time. So
yeah,
I
yeah,
think that's why we had
yeah,
to wait.
yeah, because it got delivered here, and I think I had it for it must have been a month or a couple of months, and I remember riding it home from work,
Mm.
and about 10 miles from home, just randomly rode past this guy who was walking down the pavement, and he was like, "Nice fossil, mate." And I was like, "What?" So obviously the word had got out that
Yeah,
someone else had noticed the brand, and
yeah,
I thought I was quite chuffed at that because I obviously been posting on social media that I was testing the bike.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so I need to
That's
ask.
cool.
I mean, I
Yeah.
know the answer. Why Fustle Bikes?
Why the name?
Yeah,
Yeah, I think coming up with a name is the hardest part a lot of the time. And in my experience, it was I'd never come up with a brand name before. I'd always, ended up working on a project that the brand name already existed or was a trademark that was bought or whatever. So when we started thinking of ideas of, well, what are we going to call this? We knew what the product was going to be. We thought we knew who the customer was. We were trying to solve a bit of a problem, and then we thought, right, well, we better give this thing a name. And we knew we needed to get a trademark applied for, and the pressure was kind of, I can't remember. We'd already kind of ordered the frames, so we had to, we'd committed, and that had started, that process had started. So at
yeah.
some point the factory was going to say, well, you need to give us your artwork so we can print the sticker on it. And we were like, oh, well, then we need to know what the sticker's going to say. So then we thought, well, we need to know what we're going to call the brand so we can, so that kind of put pressure on. And then, yeah, like my wife and I were sitting in a kitchen, and then a good friend of mine kind of came in, and we were all trying to think of ideas. Some of the names that we came up with, I,
So,
I
so
still
what
have
what
them.
are the ones that you rejected?
So,
Can you say?
yeah, I should have dug them out. I have a page or a notebook with a stack of pages with all sorts of names written down. All of them were terrible, and to be honest, even when we kind of landed on Fossil, I wasn't that sold on it. I'm like, yeah, it's the closest we've come so far, and I think now that it's been printed on bikes and it's been around for long enough, to me, it
Yeah,
sounds normal. It's taken a few years for it to sound to me like a normal, like a bike company name, though. If
yeah.
I'm entirely honest, I maybe shouldn't say that, but that's kind of where I came to. At one point, there was one name came up, so and it was like Bojo or something along those lines, and this was obviously long before
Yeah.
Boris
Oh
Johnson had
dear.
kind of made a few mistakes, but I'm glad we swerved that one. But yeah, I don't
But
know,
I
terrible.
mean, it's certainly done its job because it's a talking point. Because
Yeah, yeah.
people will peer at the downtube and go,
What is it?
"What,
Yeah,
fossil?
yeah. And
What's that mean?"
there's quite a few pronunciations too, that we hear and we cringe a little bit. But yeah, I think the mantra, like the whole part of it was, the reason we wanted Fustle to exist was kind of to take a lot of the fuss out of cycling and bikes, because there's so much. I think the industry kind of has a lot of information, and the customers are really well educated and they consume all this information, but sometimes the information, I think, is overcomplicated, and it's just riding bikes at the end of the day.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
we wanted our bikes to be, not full of choice and not kind of too complicated. And, it's one bike, it's never the wrong bike. You could be going on a road ride and our bike's still fine. You could be kind of going a little bit off road and end up on a mountain bike trail. It's still fine. It's not perfect.
yeah,
It's not perfect at either, but actually it's fine, and it's going to let you ride wherever you may end up. And I think there are so many little segments of categories that exist on all these different bikes that have slightly different rotor size or slightly different this or that. And customers are going, well, geez, how do I know which one's right for me? And I think that to me fed into, well, what should Fustle be? And it needs to be simplifying it in a lot of ways. And I think
yeah.
that's what led to that, that kind of less fuss mantra. Let's try and really make it as plain and simple as we could. There was a buddy of mine said years and years ago, he said, "Do you want to come and play golf with me?" And I'd never played golf, and I was like, "This golf, what's this all about?" I'll give it a go. And then I thought, right, we're going in the morning to play golf, and all these questions started going around in my head. I'm like, "What are you supposed to wear? And do you have to bring your own clubs? I haven't got clubs. What do what's the etiquette?" And then you start
Yeah.
researching a little bit, and all this information comes off the internet about and varying opinions on what's right, what's wrong, which the cycle industry is no different. There
Yeah,
are
yeah,
millions of different experts out there, but everybody's got their own opinion and no one's right or wrong. And I think, to me, I thought, well, if this is how hard it is for me to just go and play like an amateur round of golf with a buddy of mine, is cycling the same?
yeah,
And I suppose I like I like people that haven't really cycled getting into it and experience it, because we love it. That's why we're doing what, that's why you're sitting,
yeah.
you know talking to me now is because you've
Yeah,
got a passion for cycling, and you always want to share that with other people. Otherwise, you wouldn't be trying to tell people your story and
yeah,
and
yeah,
review products. And I think we're the same. So I wanted to make sure that anyone that wants to get into cycling or wants to try a new form of cycling doesn't get hit with that same issue that I got hit with when I was trying to find out about golf. So I
yeah,
think
yeah.
that's a
hundred
lot of that
percent,
feeds
hundred
into
percent. I mean, that is the reason that I'm doing it, really.
yeah,
And I started with a gravel because there were literally no rules at the start.
yeah,
And I mean, sadly now the UCI's got involved and there's some
yeah,
sort of professional circus about it. But I still think that at the
yeah,
grassroots level, if you want to turn up in a pair of walking boots and a pair of jeans and
yeah,
ride, just
yeah,
do it. You
yeah.
know, if you want the latest, Italian kit, do that as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, it's
Exactly. I think that that's a big appeal for me as well, is that it's open to interpretation. There are no rules. Mountain
yeah,
biking is very, you can look like a mountain biker or you can look like a road biker, but gravel's just it's so broad and it can mean so many different things to so
yeah.
many people. And I think
Oh,
that's what we
it's
wanted to try and do with Fustle.
It's perfect for me because if you speak to anyone that I ride with, they will all tell you I have no dress sense at all, and I'm slightly colourblind. So some of the things I
Mm,
pair together, it's like
yeah,
it is the epitome of no rules, just ride.
bit
Because
questionable.
yeah, 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 definitely. Unfortunately, it
Yeah,
also happens in real life, away from bikes.
yeah.
Excuse me, coughing.
You're right.
Yeah, so the actual bike, the thing I liked about it, because
Mm,
I probably came from a more off-road background. I've always ridden mountain bikes more than road
sure,
bikes.
sure.
And a lot of the gravel bikes at the start, the companies have basically taken either their hybrid bike and stuck a flat bar on it,
Yeah.
um, or a road bike geometry. Um, with a slightly more clearance for wider tires. But your
Mm,
bike actually was more mountain bike, I'd say.
yeah, yeah.
So you have got that sense then, if you did go off road, like you say, you ended up on a mountain bike trail, you
Mm,
basically weren't going to die
yeah.
because it's slightly slacker angles, it's slightly less twitchy.
Yeah.
And that's what I loved about it
Mm,
because, and especially because it's got that sloping top tube, you can fit a dropper post, you can get that saddle out the way.
mm,
And a lot of people say, well, why do you need a dropper post on a gravel bike? And so if you go exploring and you don't
yeah.
know what's around the next corner, and
Mm,
you can get that saddle out the way. Either
yeah.
you're going to go faster because it's fun, or you're going to get it out of the way and you're going to stay safe. You're not going to fall on the
Totally.
ground because of it.
Yeah.
No, that's what I liked about the bike. Um,
Mm, yeah. And I think that's kind
did
of
you?
how it came about as well, was that I wanted to ride slightly different stuff from my house. I wanted to be able to go and ride without having to drive for an hour to get to the mountains, kind of thing. And then
Yeah,
the first thing I get my hands on was a cyclocross bike. So I took one of the bar, at the time I was working obviously at Chain Reaction. So I took a Vetus cyclocross bike and brought it home and took it for a spin. And I was like, oh, this is all right. This is kind of, well, it wasn't cool, but this was all right. And then that kind of, I suppose my brain was always thinking, well, this could be better if this had like slightly different geometry, or the tires are still a bit, and that just evolved and evolved and evolved, and that's what led to the idea of that Causeway that you're talking about, because
yeah,
it was a bit more dedicated. It was like, well, look at all this opportunity that we've got to make a bike that could be far better than what exists, rather than taking a bike that's got tight tire clearance and putting 650B wheels on that they tried to market as a benefit, but that was
yeah,
just so they could put bigger tires on. So
yeah,
why not make the clearance in the first place in your frame and then put bigger tires on a 700C wheel and then get all that benefit? I suppose it was my way of thinking about that led to the Causeway,
yeah, yeah.
I
Well, I
guess.
suppose you were designing it from scratch, from the ground
Yeah,
up,
yeah, yeah,
rather than trying to jump on the bandwagon because
totally.
big companies say, "Oh, we need a gravel bike.
Mm,
Let's adapt this design
yeah,
slightly."
yeah,
So yeah, I think that's where you've benefited.
mm,
Um,
yeah, yeah, for sure.
as I said earlier, we spoke in 2020, just before the COVID pandemic.
Mm,
What was it like? Because basically launching a bike brand in the
yeah.
middle of a global pandemic, where at one
Mm,
point no one thought they were going to go outside at all ever again. And then the
Yeah,
next day, the only thing you could do was go out on a bike. So there was a
yeah,
massive demand for bikes and components. I mean,
yeah.
did yours fly out the door, or were you then up against the supply issues?
Yeah, yeah. Well, we were. It was a roller coaster for sure. So I think we'd already committed. We'd started. Everybody thinks Fustle launched in at the start of 2020, but obviously we'd started probably 2 years prior working on it. So I
Yeah,
suppose this was us leading. We'd been used to it. We'd got the name. We'd got the ideas. We'd made commitments. We'd ordered parts. We knew everything was kind of working towards this launch date, which turned out to be March 2020, which is more famous for obviously COVID now.
yeah,
And the container, there was a container of frames on its way to Northern Ireland. We knew that when they arrived, right, we've got the parts, we'll build it. And then I suppose we were trying to go down this route of lining up, bike reviews with. This is why the conversation I had with you. I'm like, as soon as I can get a bike freed up, because they're it's expensive as a we were basically funding this all ourselves. So to try and
yeah,
get bikes that we could send for review we had to just be a bit more careful with it. I think we had 6 samples in total that we were able to try and, we'd use those to test and then build as bikes and then try and figure out specs. And anyway, yeah, when COVID happened, I suppose, or when it all broke in the news, we just had a container of bikes landed, frame sets landed, and trying to then figure out, and we panicked as everyone did. We didn't know, we've never gone through this before, and I
yeah,
think. We have another staff member, Aaron, who was brought in, and he was going to be building all the bikes. And straight away, we're kind of like, "Oh, hold on a second! If we can't sell these bikes and the world's in lockdown, what do we do?" So we did what most other bike companies did at the time, and they went down the route of, right, we're going to have to close for however long this is going to be, and then realized that, oh, we're allowed to cycle, we're allowed to go outside. So
yeah,
I think Aaron, who works in the workshop, was kind of put on furlough for a couple of weeks, and then we were like, get him off furlough, come back, we need to get. So it was kind of a turbulent time for sure. And then I think, if I'm entirely honest, I definitely think it did benefit us. It gave us a real springboard to launch, because we had a couple of really good reviews. And we had, you're not the only person who reviewed the bike and then wanted to buy one, which was really good for us. It's a
yeah.
really good kind of signature that
A bit of
we're.
an expensive way to sell bikes, though. Send
It,
them out
it,
for a
it
review and then
is.
sell
It's
them.
like a, yeah, long-winded kind of
Yeah,
test ride. But it gave us confidence that we weren't crazy and we hadn't developed a product that was stupid. Whenever the media and the journalists who have ridden loads of different bikes kind of go, yeah, I like this and I like it enough to put my hand in my pocket, whenever they're probably being bikes thrown at them all the time. I
yeah,
think that was a little bit of confidence for us, off the back of that. And then we started to sell through what we had. And the supply chain issues didn't happen straight away. There was plenty of group set stock. There was plenty of surplus there,
yeah,
because nobody knew what was going to happen. Nobody had forecast that COVID would happen. So I suppose the shortages of stock did affect us, but it didn't happen straight away.
hmm,
And I think as well, in hindsight now, we're in the middle of a bit of a reset now, where we've learned a hell of a lot in the last 3 years, and we've made a lot of changes and been a bit braver with forecasting and managing supply chains, because we kind of got caught out with the whole thing.
yeah, yeah,
The bigger brands got caught out too, but they manage things differently, and when they have these big kind of banks of cash flow that they can afford to play with, they were maybe a little bit braver. Well, they were all a lot braver than we were in terms of placing orders for the future.
yeah,
We didn't necessarily react and do that, so we paid the price maybe a year later. I can't remember exactly when we ran out of stock, but when we ran out of stock, we were basically out of stock for about 8 months. We just could not get more group sets, and we had half of a bike, but we
yeah,
didn't have the other half,
yeah,
and so we
yeah,
couldn't sell it. And we
yeah,
weren't. There were a lot of companies that would take your money from a customer and say, "Yep, you buy your bike, and we'll give it to you in a couple of weeks' time." And I'll not mention certain companies, but a lot of the bike brands that did do that ended up not been able to deliver the bikes
yeah,
because the
yeah,
delays came from all over the place. And canal, or that Suez Canal thing had an
Yeah,
effect on some people. There were
yeah,
so many factors that were going on, and then with a lot of the bike components coming from Asia, if they went into lockdown, the factories closed, all these things. There's so many knock-on effects, and we didn't get greedy. We were too young and naive to do that, I think, which probably helped us and protected us in some respects. We
yeah,
didn't make hundreds of thousands of pounds like these big companies did, but we also then didn't get kind of caught as a lot of them are now, with warehouses full of 40, 50,000
yes,
bikes.
yeah, yeah. It's
So you can look at it either
that's a
way.
good thing, isn't it? Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, we ran out of stock eventually, and that was just when momentum was getting going and we had good reviews. So I think we did pay the price in some respects, because we had customers that wanted to buy one of our bikes. They'd read your review, or they'd read a review from somewhere else, and they were like, yeah, this is the right bike for me. And we just didn't have the bikes, and we weren't prepared to take their money and say, we don't know when we can get you the bike, but we'll get you it at some point. It didn't sit well with me to do that.
yeah.
So we chose not to. And we ended up actually getting some customers that had cancelled orders with other companies because of that same reason. So it sort of paid off eventually. Yeah.
So the causeway, I presume it's named after the Giant's Causeway, which is in your part of the world. I think
Yeah.
you should say where you are actually. You near Belfast, is that?
Yeah. So we were in a village called Crawfordsburn, which is 10 minutes from Belfast. It's pretty close by. And then I'm where I'm at home at the minute, but our workshop's 5 minutes in the other direction. So it's all and yeah, so we're 10 minutes from Belfast and about an hour's drive from the Giant's Causeway, which is up on the north coast.
Yeah,
That's kind of the north coast of Ireland is kind of our getaway. That's when we've had too much of bicycles. We'll tend to drive up there and kind of spend the day or spend an overnight, and just try and escape from it all. It's like it's far enough away that it feels like you're in a different country, but you're not really.
yeah, because your bike design, the graphics has the
Yeah, yeah,
hexagonal. Is that the right
yeah, yeah, yeah,
um, like logo on the top tube, which
yeah.
we both know is an absolute pain in the backside when you want to put protective Invisiframe on it.
Yeah, we could have made life a bit easier. We yeah. Well, maybe not. We'll not include those in the next graphic
Oh
revision.
no, I think you have. I think you have to.
Yeah.
So that's the current bike
Mm,
is aluminium,
it
which
is.
I presume is a much easier material to work with if you're sort of mass producing frames in, I presume, Taiwan or the Far East.
Yeah.
But recently, over the last few months, you've also done a steel version.
Yeah.
But that's not coming from Taiwan, is it?
No, it's coming from 5 minutes the other way.
Okay, so why a steel version, and why
Yeah.
someone in Northern Ireland? Because that must cost a hell of a lot more to produce than a
Yeah.
container full from
It
Taiwan.
does. Yeah. Well, I think deep down, I've got this kind of. I'm very proud of our country, and I'm kind of proud to come from here. And like I said, 20 minutes ago, there wasn't a massive amount of opportunity to work in the bike trade whenever I wanted to get into it, and I kind of
Yeah,
now feel like I've been very fortunate throughout my career to have opportunities presented that allow me to work in loads of different bits of the bike trade and travel, and really, as a person from Northern Ireland, get more immersed in it. And that opportunity is something that I kind of feel like it's an obligation to create more opportunity for other people, if that
yeah,
makes sense.
yeah,
So we try and we have a business here, we employ staff, we try and help other businesses and other people here that are interested in cycling to like give them advice and give them a steer. And I think I've always had this dream of trying to, rather than producing bikes in Asia, which is fine, and it's 95% of the bikes in the world come from out there. I thought, why not give it a go and try and produce bikes here and set up some sort of manufacturing facility to do that. Yes, it's more expensive. That's really the only downside. There's a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of knowledge, and a lot of, Northern Ireland has a lot of, I guess, engineering experience and
yeah,
heritage. We'll not talk about that ship that sank, but there is a lot of,
yeah,
there is a lot of kind of engineering based
yeah,
skills here, essentially. But yeah, I think it's a passion project as well. Like, if you're not doing a job that you enjoy, why do it? And I suppose, to me, designing bikes and having bikes made in Taiwan is great, but it comes with a lot of challenges too. And I thought, why not try and do something more local? And Owen, who runs Donard Bikes, is 5 minutes down the road, and we've been in touch for a couple of years now, and I've kind of bounced ideas off him, and he's done the
Yeah.
same for me. And the timing just felt right to say, well, why don't we try and do some sort of collaboration? So that is I suppose, the start of a process where we're going to be working together, his brand and our brand, and doing a few different projects. But the end goal is very much that we as Fustle start to produce our own steel bikes in-house. But it's quite hard to just have a pop-up steel bike factory overnight.
Yeah,
So,
I can imagine.
So this was I
Plus,
guess
it is a bit of a dying art, isn't it?
totally. Yeah. Yeah.
Brazing or welding steel tubes
Exactly.
together.
There are not a lot of people doing it, and I think, and especially not a lot of people doing it well. And it's something that I wanted to go and do it. I would love nothing more than to just not have to work and go and learn how to build steel frames myself.
Yeah.
But that takes such an investment in time, to learn that. It's not, those skills need that, you've got to put in your 10,000 hours or whatever they refer to. So
they've not let you have a go on the gas axe then.
no, and I got told off by the Johnny who paints the frames for us. I got told off by him for sanding it too much as well. So I'm a bit heavy-handed. I'm good behind a computer, but when it starts getting too technical, but I love learning all that stuff, and I will try and do that. But yeah, it's sometimes I'm a firm believer in let the experts do their thing as well, and then try and but yeah, what I've been working on recently with Owen is trying to look at 3D printed parts as well, because I suppose he comes from the craft side of it, and I'm coming from the my experience has been volume production in factories. So we're trying to come together, and I'm saying, well, if we 3D print this part, that might actually take a lot of the labor out of it, and it might improve accuracy and tolerances and all that sort of stuff. So that's where we're kind of working towards being in the middle.
See, it's the 3D printing thing is just total witchcraft to me. How you could program that, and then the machine just gets on with it and 3D prints it. So I presume you're talking like bottom bracket junctions, headset, head tube.
We're kind of looking at the
out of steel. I mean, how does it do that?
yeah. Maybe it is witchcraft. It's magic. We'll start with the most complicated parts, which generally are the dropouts, because you've got two seat stays and two chain stays coming in there. So if we can do that part, and you've got a brake mount as well and a mech hanger to think about. So that's the kind of logical area to start on, and then eventually we'll move forward to a chainstay yoke and head tube. The front triangle isn't too difficult. You don't really need to print anything there because it's just 3 tubes all together. So I don't think we'll touch that. I've got some ideas. I have a few ideas that I would like to do that might add value to the whole thing for the customer. It might make a better bike, but I'll not.
Is one of them a sliding dropout, so you've got the option to run it as a single speed?
No.
Oh well, no. Can you put that on your list, please?
I'll put that on my list. Maybe we need a sliding bottom bracket instead. Maybe that would make life easier.
Yeah, well, it's just when you get the eccentric bottom bracket, they're just a bit unsightly.
Yeah,
it just looks neater with the sliding dropout. Anyway, just get on with that.
I'll put it on the list, Gary.
Yeah. So these are currently you can order these frames.
Yeah, so they're live now, and they're quite short lead time as well. So you can order one today, and then essentially we basically standardized the geometry so that it's the same as the Causeway, because
why change your winning formula?
We've looked a few times at how can we improve that, and it's really it's honestly quite difficult, and that's not just marketing talk. I'm like, we don't really feel the need to change that Causeway, so we haven't changed it in a while now, and other than adding the steel version in, so it'll be the same geometry, unless if somebody really wanted something a little bit different or a bit longer, or if somebody really tall or really small came in, we probably could, because we're making them by hand. We can change it, I suppose. So
is there any challenge in the difference of the material if you're using the same geometry? Is the steel more flexible than the aluminium, so you've got to change the design slightly?
Well, aluminium we haven't really changed the design. No, aluminium's a softer material, but you've got to go thicker in the wall thickness. So I suppose the theory is that steel, you can go with really thin wall tubes and you can still retain a comfortable ride. The part of the reason we wanted to do that steel bike was we just got asked about it a lot, to the point where we we had no answer. We would get
Yeah.
people asking on a weekly basis, "Do you do this in steel? When's the steel one coming out?" And I ran out of excuses to say,
You got
I,
bullied into it.
I kind of got bullied into it, and because I suppose my view is the aluminium bike's really good, and it's kind of the right price point, I feel, for the components
Yeah.
that are going on it, and
Yeah.
to add a steel bike in, I'm like, it's going to be quite expensive. So that's why we thought, well, why do a steel bike that's going to be more expensive and have it made in Asia, and it's not really any better or any worse? That's when the
Yeah.
decision was,
Yeah.
well, let's actually use this and add the value in the fact that it's creating more jobs and more opportunity in this
Yeah.
country. And that was
Yeah.
part of, I think that's what helped us get that project kind of
Well, that's it.
moving
It's more
forward.
expensive, but look what you're paying for. It's
Yeah,
actually
yeah,
put together by a craftsman,
yeah. Well,
literally
that's it.
5 minutes from what
Yeah,
It's I think it's worth that extra, isn't it? For
totally.
that kudos and the fact that you've given something back.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and the guys that everybody that's involved in that, whether it's Owen that's making the frame, or whether it's Johnny that paints it, they're all cyclists too, and they're kind of, so they're spending that money on bicycle parts and trips, and I think
yeah,
it's a really nice little family feel, if that makes sense.
yeah.
Johnny, who paints them, ended up buying, he's got two of our bikes now, and he comes along on all the
See,
rides
this
that
is
we do,
brilliant.
and
It's brilliant
it's great.
marketing, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So obviously, based in Northern Ireland, do you think that is um, a benefit or a hindrance for starting a bike company being on the
Yeah.
island rather than the mainland?
I think if you're starting the business for the right reasons, I don't think it matters where in the world you are, because you'll make it work. And I suppose our view was, we're not going to move. We're not going to move to a different country. We live here. This is where we. So why should we do things differently? Is it logistically? Yeah, it's a bit harder to get bike parts. It's just one more ferry crossing, or
Yeah,
it's slightly more difficult that way, but it's not that big. It's not that big a hurdle that it becomes an issue, if that makes sense.
yeah, yeah,
And I suppose, and from an export point of view as well, yes, distance wise, it's a bit more difficult to get bikes into Europe. But actually, with all the politics that went on, Northern Ireland's
mm,
actually in a bit of a sweet spot with the European single market and the
yeah,
UK. So,
yeah.
and a lot of people don't really understand it, and I think it can make things more difficult to bring to import from the UK, but that's all being figured out. So actually, no, I think at the minute we're in quite a good place. Our prices have become a lot more competitive in Europe than a lot of the UK based
Yeah.
brands.
Oh, good, good.
So it's good in that respect, yeah. And we see that Europe is quite a big part of our market in terms of total sales. So which is
Oh,
cool.
that's excellent. So,
Mm.
are you completely direct, or do you have dealers?
We are pretty much direct, but we do have a couple of dealers that we work with. But again, that's not really a strategic. Probably if there are business owners here that know what they're doing, they're probably cringing at all the stuff I'm saying. But again, it's all based on relationships. So any of the dealers we're in, it's generally because I've got a friend that has a bike shop and they like the product and they know that their customers that walk in the door would really benefit. I'm like, well, why not? Have the bikes in your shop, and it lets them. But it works for us too, because it allows someone in the mainland to swing a leg over and sit on it and see the bike and
Yeah,
ride it.
yeah,
In some respects, all with that said, they have to be reasonably close to that bike shop, and there aren't really that many of them. So we have maybe 3 or 4 dealers in total that kind of do a couple of bikes a year for us, but primarily it's direct. We just haven't got the same scale to be able to offer a dealer margin and a margin
yeah,
for us in there.
yeah,
So we basically, if we're doing it with a dealer, it's it's not really overly profitable for us. So it's more of a favor, I guess, to say, look, let's hope that helps us build a brand and build awareness,
yeah,
but it also gives the shop, it needs to make sense for them
yeah,
as well.
yeah.
So
So you're doing. I notice you've got you're doing demo rides from the
yeah.
warehouse or the HQ.
Well, a big part of the launch plan was, can't wait to do let's do loads of demos, let's get people riding the bikes, because they're so weird. A lot of people won't know what first of all, a lot of people won't really know what a gravel bike's supposed to be because, like you said, Gary, it's so broad; it can be so many things. So
Yeah,
we wanted to do demo events, we wanted to do all these different shows, and then obviously when COVID happened, we couldn't do any of that. So we'd been sitting really excited about doing a demo once COVID kind of relaxed enough to let us do it. So I think we did our first one this time last year, actually. February last year was our first demo, and then we've done 3 or 4 or 5 since then. I've lost count actually.
yeah.
But yeah, we do them now. They're pretty relaxed, and just we have a stack of bikes in the workshop, and we tend to put on.
And I presume that the local riding is pretty good then.
It's all right. Yeah, I mean, we don't. It's not California by any means, but especially
Well,
not
that's a good
in
thing
February.
because who'd want
Yeah.
to ride, when it's a regular warm temperature and it never rains? I mean, that must be
Yeah,
terrible.
it sounds horrible.
At
Yeah, well,
least
that's it.
we've got some seasons here.
True, true. And we've done the demos throughout the year and we've seen the different temperatures and conditions. But the riding here, we've actually got a reasonably fun loop from the office that is pretty much all off road, up into a forest. And it's the forest I grew up mountain biking in, so for me it's it has a lot of, I
Yeah,
guess, memories too. So I enjoy taking people that aren't customers, but they just want to come and try one of the bikes. And I enjoy taking them on the loop and showing them around. And just to also, gravel biking in this country, and I'm sure it's the same for you over there. Like, it's not the same as these pictures you see on the Shimano or SRAM catalog of these guys in
yeah,
California.
yeah,
It's totally
yeah, yeah,
different, and
yeah,
it is a little bit more like mountain biking, where you don't know what you're going to encounter, but it's probably going to be mud and roots and a bit of hard pack and a bit, a
yeah.
variety of everything. So,
Which
and
is
I think,
what the gravel bike is
yeah,
perfect for, isn't it?
exactly. So the loops that we do tend to reflect that a little bit as well. And they've got a bit of road, a bit of standard fire trail, and then a little bit of mountain bike path. And most of the time we've done those demos, everybody's coming back with a big smile and they really quite like it. So we're just in the process of starting to plan some other demo events. So we're doing one in March, in Wicklow, just outside of Dublin.
Yeah,
So we're excited about that. It's been quite hard we're such a small team, it's quite hard to coordinate, doing the logistics of doing a demo
yeah,
ride
yeah.
somewhere else. So that one in Wicklow in March will be quite exciting, hopefully, and it's a cool part of the world too. If you've ever been across.
Yeah, so anyone listening now, if you go on social media and search for the hashtag Fustle Family, there's quite a few
Mm,
people out there on the bikes, isn't there? And it is a
yeah,
sort of community thing.
I
We're
suppose.
all in the same club. We're all riding on the
Yeah,
same bike. I know locally of 3 or 4 other. No, hang on, 4 other causeways
yeah.
in probably 15 miles of this room.
No way.
So it's definitely a bike for the West Midlands.
Yeah, and I think that whole Fustle family thing, I'm glad you mentioned it because it started so organically. I think we could never have created that or thought about what that would be, when we were planning the brand. That just kind of happened. And I actually think it was Jeb. I don't know if you've ridden with Jeb.
I have, yeah,
uh,
yeah.
he bought a bike from
And
us,
Mandy.
and yeah, Jeb and Mandy, and they kind of just started. I think they created this hashtag, one of on some photograph that he'd done, and then it just started to snowball from there. And it's really, really, it's cool, and it has, like you say, it's become a little kind of clan of people that, my wife cracks up when I call them misfits, but everybody's a little bit of a misfit. They're all a bit
Slightly
unique.
eccentric. Yeah,
Yeah, well, just everybody's got their own story and their own life going on. And I think whenever we do get together, with everybody, it's always really, the conversations are always really interesting, and being a fly on the wall is quite funny. But they're all, the common denominator is that they all really enjoy riding the bikes, and some of them didn't ride at all before they bought one of our bikes. And
wow.
and you're seeing them learn new skills and all these kind of things going
Yeah,
on. So
yeah,
it's really, really rewarding. We may not be making the same kind of turnover and profit as all these big bike brands, but we get a hell of a lot of good feels from
yeah.
what we see going on. And
Satisfaction.
yeah, yeah, which I suppose you can't put a price on. And actually, Jeb and Mandy managed to fly. They got the boat across for one of our family rides
Oh,
a
cool.
couple of months ago.
Yeah,
I think it was a big birthday of Jeb's, so they came across for a weekend, and it was so cool that they made it and saw everybody else. And yeah, so hopefully we can do more of those, and we need to plan to try and come across to the mainland and do
yeah,
something similar. So
yeah.
um,
Well,
yeah, you
the
can be the host.
the people listening to this can't see the room I'm in, but obviously Alistair can because we're on camera
Yeah.
as well. You can come put the sleeping bag on the floor down there if you
We'll
want.
kip up. Yeah, yeah.
And
Perfect.
so, what's the future of Fustle Bikes? Is it going to stick with gravel bikes, or are there other things in the pipeline?
Yeah, it's a good question. At the minute, we are kind of working on more bike models that we're going to add in. So we're making some big changes. Probably a bit early to talk about them right now, but there are some big changes happening, and there will be a new model. That's not a. Is it a gravel bike? It's not really a gravel bike. It's open to interpretation. Some people might think it's a gravel bike. So that will
Deliberately
probably
vague there.
deliberately vague. Yeah,
Yeah.
that
Don't
will
blame
be
you.
that'll be released around September time this year, and there won't be any changes to the Causeway for the foreseeable. It's really hard to do anything different with it. It will change in some form at some point, but who knows when. Will it always be gravel bikes? I don't know. I don't see why we can't diversify a little bit. We've got such a broad background in mountain biking as well as gravel,
Yeah.
and I think even I've dabbled in a bit of road. So I think we don't know where things will go. I think what we try to do is, and it's helpful for us to be so close with our customers too, because those family ride outs, you gain a lot of, I guess, you get a lot of questions answered in terms of what people actually need and want. So we use that. That's kind of real world product feedback to help steer what we need to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I can see us doing something more off road in the future, whether that's mountain bikes or I don't know just yet. I've got ideas of things I'd like to test and try, but until we can do something that really adds value, then we'll probably not do it. If we're, I don't want to just bring out another bike that doesn't really have a purpose, or if it's the same as something else, well then why, because we can't make it as cheap as somebody else can, so we have to compete in a different area. And to me, what we did so well with the Causeway was really listening to what needed to happen and take a bit of a gamble on, well, let's make it dropper compatible, let's do these other things that for the right person, they made all the world of difference. So we want to try and repeat that and do that with other products, which we hopefully can do. So
Yeah, and I
but
suppose
I'm excited.
you haven't got the excuse me, I'm going to cough again. You haven't got the pressure that these big conglomerate bike companies have, where no one actually cares what the bike looks like. All they're looking at is the numbers.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
you haven't got that pressure. Oh, we need to bring another model out because we need to make so much this year. So,
Yeah.
although I'm sure you need to make money because you've got to pay your bills as well. But
yeah, exactly. We don't. I suppose a lot of those big companies are focused on growth, so they're looking for what's the next opportunity for us to really add, 10 times the sales volume with a new
yeah,
model or
yeah,
whatever. We don't look at it that way. We kind of look at it in terms of, well, we've got one model right now, so we've got the world is our oyster, but what would we do that would add, would create a product that's actually useful and desirable to somebody? So we look at it that way. But yeah, it's still a business. We still have to finance it ourselves, and that's difficult. We've chosen not to go down the route of investment and big growth and promising the world, because that just sounds like a whole pile of stress that I'm not sure we want. And we've dipped our toe in things like that, and I think it keep coming back to more of this, let's just be happy with what we're doing, create a brand that has real good kind of ethics and is doing things for the right reason. And the main focus again is to help build cycling in the UK and in Northern Ireland in particular. So if we can make decisions that help keep us on that path, then I'll be happy with it. But for sure, I've got loads of product ideas that I want to do. I'm constantly designing bikes for other people, and I got to the point where I frustrated, like, why don't I just design some for myself? So
are you out in the restaurant and you just start scribbling on the napkin?
it's hard to switch off. It is hard to. I find like that. I talked about going to the North Coast to get my head shot, because I do. We get overdosed in bikes. I've done nothing but talk about bikes since I was 12, and it does get a bit heavy at times. So we'll disappear off to the North Coast and relax and not talk about bikes, and that's when all of a sudden these ideas start to pop in. So I'm like starting to scribble it down for sure. And yeah,
it happens when I'm out on my bike and I'm riding along, and you're slightly you're paying attention on where you're going, but you're also working things out in your head.
Start
Nine
thinking about
times out of
horizontal
10, I've 9 times out of 10 I've forgotten by the time I get home. But, one or two ideas stick.
Yeah.
It's
So
interesting.
you've got to create a vacuum, I think, for sure, for those ideas to come back in.
So, is there anything else you want to say about Fustle Bikes, or anything you want to bring up before we finish?
No, I think we've covered. I think you've covered pretty much everything. Yeah, I'm kind of really glad that you gave me the opportunity to talk to you. I think it's cool that we've been able to build a bit of a relationship with UK Gravel Co. and with you, Gary, and hopefully we can kind of continue to do that. And
Yeah,
we're all rooting for the underdog, so hopefully,
yeah, yeah.
you can grow your thing
Long live
with
the
us.
underdog. But,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for coming on the podcast.
No, thank you.
It's been I found it interesting, so hopefully other people find it interesting.
I'll
What
probably
I'll
look
do
forward.
when I publish it, I'll put links down to the videos you've done
Yeah,
for the steel frame, because
yeah,
that's really interesting,
yeah.
and obviously your website as well. So great, thanks for coming on. Um,
Perfect.
Best of luck with the new designs that you can't talk about. But yeah, if you
I'll
can
show you.
work on the horizontal dropout, that'd be great.
I'll stick it in my notes, Gary.
Okay. Well, thanks very much.
Thanks, Gary.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Well, massive thanks to Alistair for coming on the podcast, taking time out of his busy day to come chat to me. As I said, check out Fustle Bikes. I'll put the links to their website down below and the videos of the steel frame that we chatted about. And I hope you've enjoyed this latest episode. This is the sort of thing that I wanted the podcast to be about. And it's great to see an insight from the person who's actually designing bikes. I don't think if you went to one of the big bike companies, you'd be able to chat to the designer and the owner at the same time about their ideas, why they started the company, and their strategy going forward. So look out for the next episode of the UK Gravel Collective Cycling Podcast, and thanks for listening.